holiday or a vacation, you always know what your apartment's going to look like, or your hotel or your Airbnb. You pick it out months in advance. We didn't know what it would look like. Sometimes it was open hall, sometimes it was a corridor, and sometimes it was the train itself, and sometimes it was once it was an unfinished accommodation building where I nearly stepped into an elevator that didn't exist. And so what I'm trying to get at here is the way monk life is set up, it made me so okay with change and constant surprise and uncertainty, because we never had any of that. And you never even knew what your next meal was.
Yeah.
When food was always given to you, you never chose off a menu. And so when I look at your title of your book and I look at what's happening in the world right now, when you talk about embracing change, the common rhetoric right now is, I wish things would go back to being the same, or I guess this is our new normal, or when will this end? And it's funny because when you ask the question, when will this end? That's a sign that you want change. But then we're also at the same time asking the question like, oh, I wish things would go back to being the same. And so where does emotional agility, why is it that we're so addicted to sameness? And where does emotional agility and stability come in? Like, what is stability? Is stability even real? And so, yeah, I hope that's not too many questions. But I think
no, that's really beautiful. So firstly, we know that cognitively human beings are drawn to what is easy, what is coherent, and what is familiar. So what is easy, we will always default as human beings to what just feels easy. We will always default to what feels coherent. You know, there have been very interesting studies showing that when people in organizations are sometimes individuals with a very low self-concept, and then they get promoted, those individuals will often completely counterintuitively leave the organization. And part of what's been explored is that there can be a disconnect between the story they have of themselves, which feels so coherent, versus this countervailing feedback that they're getting from the organization that actually makes them feel uncomfortable. So human beings are drawn to what's easy, to what's coherent, the story that we tell ourselves, and to what is familiar. And again, this is really important because it is necessary when I wake up in the morning for me to go, oh, you know, this little child that is jumping on my head is my 7-year-old daughter, Sophie. And I need to pay attention to Sophie, and I need to, you know, not pay attention to the washing machine in the background. Okay. So coherence is what allows us to make sense of all the different pieces of information that come at us every day so that we weave them into a story. And again, this is from an evolutionary perspective, really, really important that we are able to do. As human beings, we are drawn to this. Now, the downside of this is that it can lead to this autopilot, closing down from discomfort, the curse of comfort. The positive aspect of ease, the positive aspect of these ideas is, and I explore this in emotional agility, is if you've got something that feels really values aligned to you, you can then use this idea of ease to build a habit that is values aligned. So an example might be that I feel really stressed at the end of the day when I'm done with, you know, if I work in a corporate environment, when I'm done with my meeting after meeting. And now I'm trying to generate a sense of work-life integration, but in a way that feels a bit healthier and more balanced to me. And I've been finding that I've been bringing my cell phone to the table and not spending time with my family, and that work life and home life have completely meshed. And so what I do is I know that I always, you know, put my computer in a particular place as I finish up the workday. And now what I do is I do what is called piggybacking, which is I'm now adding my cell phone to the same place so that I'm not bringing my cell phone to the dinner table. And so what we're doing is we're starting to shape our environment so that it's now easy to do the things that are intentional and values connected that we really want to be doing. Another example of this that we see very often is the way we create the choice architecture in our house, where we might put fruit on the table instead of something that feels a little bit less healthy, so that it's easier for us to go to the fruit. So as human beings, we are drawn to these things. Here's the difficulty. When we sidestep tough emotions and tough emotions that come with the reality of life, when we sidestep those tough emotions, when we sidestep tough experiences and discomfort, we are not able to develop the skills that help us to adapt and change. Because, Jay, in truth, life's beauty and its fragility are interwoven. We are young and then we are not. We are healthy and then a diagnosis brings us to our knees. And so life's beauty and its fragility are interwoven. They are inseparable. And when we sidestep tough emotions, when we listen to the mantras of positive vibes only, or just be positive, and so we think when we feel difficult emotions that we shouldn't be feeling them, that they're bad, and so we sidestep them, what we are actually doing is we are failing to develop skills to live in the world as it is, not as we wish it to be, but as it is. And so discomfort, circling back to our conversation earlier about courage, discomfort is extraordinarily important. We can think about this at an individual level. You know, if I keep taking these small whispers, if I keep taking these small steps of courage, we build our own courage. But I actually think that at a broader level, the culture that we are in, the world that we are in, is begging us for courage. The world is begging us to be able to have difficult conversations, not to just say, oh, well, that person's saying something that I don't like, therefore they're toxic, therefore I'm going to cut them out of my life. If we can't have these difficult conversations, what we do is we shrink ourselves, we shrink, and we are actually more fragile rather than more agile.
That was brilliant. That was amazing. That specific point, there was something you said there that was so clear for me, and I understand it, but I've never heard it being explained in that way. Is the idea that those discomfort, those uncomfortable emotions, when we ignore them, we're losing the ability to develop skills that we need. And so actually, when you're pushing away that opportunity to grow your skills and your lessons, and the idea that we shrink, like that word was so strong for me. I was like, wow, yeah, that's so true. I'm thinking about every time in my life where I've avoided a difficult conversation. And actually, it's so true. Like you just think, oh yeah, I need to cut that out of my life and move away from that. And actually, you're so right that we're losing that skill, because life's going to keep bringing us that same situation and similar people and similar examples, because that's just life.
Yes, and then what you've done is you've avoided and shrunk rather than develop the skill and grown.
Yes, yeah, and I'm fascinated by thinking about what are some of those skills that we've missed out on, and I'm thinking about it for myself right now as you're saying that. I'm reflecting on a couple of decisions I've made and asking myself, what is it? What skill did I miss out on? And I realized that I think it's very natural for us to shut down when we're not getting the response from someone that we want, and switch off and just say, oh, well, I'll just move on. And that is such a natural thing it feels natural. But what you're actually saying is that it may feel natural, but it's actually counterintuitive and useful to our development.
Yes. So a hallmark of psychological health and well-being, a hallmark is integration rather than segmentation. When we segment, when we say these people are toxic, they're not allowed, and these people are okay, but soon they might be toxic if they say something that I don't like. We are involved in segmentation. When we say things like there's good emotions and bad emotions, we are involved in segmentation. Whereas life, the truth of life, is one of fragility and beauty interwoven.
Yes.
And that is integration. And so if we think about what does integration mean? Integration might mean that I feel a difficult emotion. I feel angry with a spouse, and I know that I love that person. And so I can still reach out and give the person a hug. But what's happening very often is when we push aside what's difficult, we then develop a story about why we've pushed that aside, and it makes sense, and that person's bad for me, and blah, 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 blah. And we do it, and we create the story, but we are shrinking. We are shrinking. We're shrinking ourselves. We're shrinking our communities. We are shrinking our capacity. We are becoming fragile when we do this. Now, to be clear, that's not to say that every relationship is a relationship that is healthy.
Of
and
course.
It's not to say that, that every person and every way we are with a person requires us just to keep going and going and going. But the difference is that when you have a rule that says something like, oh, that person's toxic, or that person's evoking something in me and I don't like, and therefore I'm not going there. What we are doing is we're being driven by our emotions. Emotional agility, what it's suggesting is that our emotions are data, but they're not directives. And I'd love to come back to this a little bit later. They're data, not directives. And so when we are cutting people off or not going there out of our emotion, when we're acting on those emotions, we are reacting. But when we are, instead of acting out of our emotions, stepping into our values, then we are responding. And so you might, if you're in the heat of the moment saying, I don't want to have anything to do with that person, that's reacting to your emotions. That's emotional inagility. Emotional agility might be saying, what are these difficult emotions signposting? Okay, my difficult emotions are data. So grief is often love looking for a home. Loneliness might be signposting that you value more intimacy and connection with your spouse and you need more of it. Disappointment might be signposting that you feel unsupported and that you need more support. Stress might be signposting depletion and you need more self-care. So what I'm suggesting in my work on emotional agility is not just that we let difficult emotions live with our so-called positive emotions, but actually that difficult emotions are signposts. They are extraordinarily beautiful because they signpost our values. And if we just slow down and we say, what is this emotion telling me about what I care about? Then we are able to respond, to step into those emotions. So to go back to this example, an emotion that says, oh, this person, is toxic and therefore I'm not going to go there. What that's doing is it's allowing the emotions to call the shots. When we say, what is this disquiet that I feel? It might be that the disquiet signals that there's something deeply values misaligned. in the relationship that you have with a person where it just actually doesn't feel right. Or the difficult emotion might be signposting that you need to have a difficult conversation, and that actually it's not about doing away with the person, it's actually about the conversation. And it's about, so a very important part of this is this idea that our emotions signpost the things that we care about. And so, Jay, to circle back, you might still be in a situation where you say, I choose not to continue investing in this relationship. But there's a difference when the choice is made as a reaction out of your emotions versus a stepping into your values. The one is grounded and skills developing and agile, and that's the stepping into your values. The other, which is the reactive part, is life shrinking and fear-based. And it's not wholehearted. It's not healthy. It's not whole.
Okay, I've done that. I need to go solve some issue. I've definitely done that. Listening to you, I'm like, oh gosh, I can totally see where I've made that mistake, and it's actually really nice to be able to spot it and hear it through some well articulated ideas where I can see that as a mirror. I can laugh at myself for it, which is
we all can. I mean, we all can. It's like all done that. We've all done that.
Yeah, which is wonderful. I want to dive into. You've mentioned the word a few times, and it's a big part of your work, fragility. And I want to start off by my limited understanding, but also my curiosity with fragility. And I was saying this to my team earlier when we were having this conversation about this question. And I was saying that I had a really interesting childhood where my mother was out and out, like loved me and showered me with love. And my father was much more detached and aloof. And what that allowed me to do is, I feel like it gave me, at least how I see myself, I see myself as someone who's pretty resilient, emotionally agile, can roll with the punches and in touch with my emotions though at the same time. And I feel like knowing that I was loved, but knowing that I had to figure it out on my own was like a really nice, unique combination. So I'm grateful to my parents for the different training I got from them in one sense, because I always knew my mom loved me and she'd always be there for me. And my dad, he kind of gave me the space to become my own human and become my own man and become my own person, because he never really was there to coddle me or, to guide me. And so I wonder, similarly with what we were talking about with the extremes, I see fragility as, sometimes I see as parents, and I'm trying to understand this. I'm not a parent yet, so I'm trying to understand it for my future. Sometimes I see that children today are so coddled and so almost like insulated, and it's almost like they're wrapped with bubble wrap, right? Like they've got bubble wrap all around them. And I wonder, is that just making them more fragile? Is the overcompensating actually creating fragility? Because now, if they've been wrapped in bubble wrap all their life, when they're dropped one day, does that make them fragile? And on the other side, what we've seen before, where the completely, almost unparenting, where there was no thought of like a child's emotions and understanding them and getting to know them and seeing how they felt, that obviously led to a lot of trauma, which we see today in the world, where people talk about their parents that way. So how do we train ourselves, friends, people in our life, children? How do we train people to be not fragile and actually have emotional agility and steadiness? Where does that start?
So I've given you very long answers for a lot of the questions. I'm going to give you like a very short answer and then I'll do longer. But when you're saying, does coddling make children more fragile? The very short answer is yes. Yes, it does.
What counts as coddling? Because I want to know what counts as coddling and what's considered good.
As you described your childhood, this very beautiful, I had this very beautiful, almost kind of a mental model. And I want to walk you through this, and then I'll circle back to what I think this actually looks like when it comes to the way we parent and the way we connect in our relationships. So bear with me. All of us have had this experience of going to a restaurant, and you see a little child in that restaurant, and the child maybe is 18 months old or 2 years old, and the child has a huge amount of glee and fun in running away from its parents or caregivers. And it's the most cute thing to watch, because what the child does is the child's in a restaurant, it kind of runs a few steps, it looks behind, it makes sure that its parents or caregivers are there, and then it runs away even more. And then it looks again and runs even more. Now, what is happening there is so beautiful. One of the most beautiful psychologists, John Bowlby, described this idea that children need a secure base. Children need a secure base. And it's this really fascinating thing that you see in a restaurant, where the very essence of knowing that the caregiver is there, that if something's going to go wrong, that the caregiver is going to be able to help, step in and help. It's that essence that allows the child to explore. So in a completely interesting, paradoxical way, it's knowing that there is a secure base to come back to that then allows the child to be curious, to take risks, to grow, to extend themselves, etc. And as you were describing your childhood, it seemed to me that like the combination of your parents almost allowed for that in you. Now, what is going on here? It's the knowledge in the child that someone's got their back. Okay? That is the essence then of allowing the child to be resilient and to explore and to be curious. Okay, let's bring this to ourselves. Compassion. I know it's something that you talk about in your work, and yet there is still this idea that being compassionate, whether it's in organizations or beyond, is somehow about being weak or lazy or letting yourself off the hook. But self-compassion is as fundamental as that example that I just gave in the restaurant. When you have your own back, when you know that if a relationship doesn't work out, or that you didn't get the job, or that something else has gone wrong, and you know that you will love yourself, that you will be there for yourself, that you will be kind to yourself in the way you speak and hold yourself, when you have your own back, what it actually does is it allows you to then take risks, be more honest, be more motivated, and to explore in the world. And so this idea that self-compassion is about being, the myth of it being weak or lazy or being dishonest, in actual fact, it is the opposite. People who are self-compassionate are more able to be honest and motivated and so on. Now, circling back to your question, because now I want to broaden this into relationship. What does this look like in relationship? And I'll use the example of a child, but we can extend this into couple or into the workplace even. So when a child, for instance, I'll be very practical here. Say you've got a child who comes home from school in non-COVID times. Right now, my kids aren't in school, but you've got a child that comes, or not in normal day school. So you've got a child that comes home from school, and the child is extremely upset. And the child says, "Mommy, Jack didn't invite me to his birthday party. Now I'm not going to invite him to mine." What you can see is the child is being rigid, inagile. The child is hooked. I'm upset. Now I'm going to react in this way. Now, often what we want to do as parents is, with very good intentions, we want to jump in. It's heartbreaking for us that the child is being rejected, that the child hasn't been invited. And so what we want to do is we want to step in And we want to say to the child, don't worry, I'll phone Jack's parents and I'll organize your invitation, or don't worry, I'm here for you. Let's go bake cupcakes. Now, we do this with really good intention, but what are we doing? We are signaling to the child that there are some emotions that are good. When they're happy, everything's fine, but there are some emotions to be feared. And we should fear sadness. We should fear anger. We should fear fear. And what we are doing when we steal away our child's opportunity to feel the full range of emotions in the way that I am suggesting that as adults we need to feel, then what we are doing is we are not allowing them to develop really important emotional skills. And these are, number one, emotions are not to be feared. There is nothing in anxiety or anger that is going to kill you, or sadness. There's nothing in that. Number two, a child that is supported in feeling their different emotions realizes that emotions pass, that emotions are transient. And isn't that is just foundational to mental health and well-being. Often when we struggle with our difficult emotions, it's because we feel that the emotion is here to stay. The sadness is here to stay. So the child learns emotions are not to be feared. The child learns that emotions pass. The child also learns that things that they do can actually shape how they feel. Okay, that they don't need someone to come and paper over emotions, but they're developing the skills. And this, Jay, we teach our children mathematics, we teach them science, but it doesn't matter what they know in the world. If they are not able to deal with the fragility of life, of pandemics, of broken relationships, they do not have the skills to thrive. So what does the alternative look like? The alternative looks like, firstly, and I might use this beautiful word, which is sawubona. I started my TED Talk with this word, sawubona. Sawubona is a Zulu word for hello. You hear it every day on the streets of South Africa, which is where I grew up. But there is such a beautiful and powerful intention behind the word sawubona, because sawubona literally translated means I see you. And by seeing you, I bring you into being. The first thing we want to do with people who are experiencing difficult emotions is not to tell them just be positive. When we say to someone just be positive, we are saying basically, I don't see your humanity, because humanity is woven with difficult emotions. So with our children, with our loved ones, we need to be able to show up to them in the same way as I'm inviting us to show up to ourselves, with acceptance, with compassion, and with a sawubona, to see. So that's showing up. The second part, Jay, this is circling back, which is helping the child to label emotions effectively. You don't need to jump in and fix, just helping the child to label emotions effectively. We've already explored how that is so important to their well-being. It sounds like you're really angry with Jack because he didn't invite you to the birthday party, and that you are sad, and that you're disappointed, and that you feel rejected. And then, Jay, last, our emotions signpost our values. So the child who says, I haven't been invited to this birthday party, what is the anger signposting? What is the sadness signposting? It's signposting that the person values friendship. And so you can have the most beautiful conversation that is literally developing your child's character, their values, their moral compass, where you say to them, it sounds like friendship is important to you. How do you want to be a friend? What does being a good friend look like? How do you want to come to the conversation with Jack tomorrow? So what you're doing is you're not jumping in and coddling. Instead, you are providing space for emotion. And in that emotion, there's the seeing, there's the stepping out, and there's the data, not directives, the values. And Jay, I again use this as an example with children. But the same applies if we're leaders. Instead of signaling to people they're either on the bus or off the bus, we can show up to their difficult emotions, and we can try to understand what's going on, and we can help them to choose who they want to be in the moment of uncertainty. And we can do the same with our loved ones and with ourselves.
Susan, I have learned so much today from you. I'm honestly so excited to go and put a lot of this into practice, because it's also speed. It's like trying to do things fast and living a speedy, overproductive life is what stops us from being able to do this, because everything you're saying requires patience and time and stillness and space. It requires that in our lives. It's so hard to do in a fast-paced, hectic environment where it's easier just to say, okay, I can't work with these people, going to work with whatever it may be.
Yes.
And it's needed. It's really needed. It's showing the need for us to I don't mean slow down as in do nothing. I just mean being present and allowing ourselves to have the space to think in this way.
Well, Jay, firstly, thank you so much for the conversation. I think it's so, there's power in the pause. There's such power in the pause. And sometimes the pause is, we know people who spend even 10 minutes writing about what their values are. If you're going into a difficult relationship or a difficult conversation or a new experience, like, who do you want to be in that? We know that even spending 10 minutes thinking about your values in the situation actually, and in studies, like, can change the course of whether people drop out of university or not, like literally changing the course of people's lives. But Jay, you invited people earlier to do that example where they say, I am sad versus I'm noticing that I'm feeling sad. And that is such a quick, beautiful call to action. And there's another that I'd love to add to that, which is, if you imagine a piece of paper and you write down on the one side of the piece of paper what it is that you might have been feeling lately: grief, loneliness, anxiety, anger, joy, whatever that is. Now, our culture would instruct you to turn over the piece of paper, and instead of lonely, to write what you should be grateful for. Instead of anxious, to write, why you should be positive. What I'm going to do is I'm going to invite people to do something different, whether that is physically or emotionally, because this can literally take a second. You've got this word on the piece of paper on the one side. On the other side, turn the piece of paper over and ask yourself, WTF? What the funk? What is the function of the emotion? What is this emotion telling me about what is important to me or what I need? Lonely, intimacy and connection. Grief, it might be love, that I've loved and that I need to reconnect with that love for the person. Sadness might again be looking for a way to connect differently. Joy might be signaling that you thrive when you are doing a particular kind of work and that you need more of that creativity. Boredom, if you're feeling bored, boredom might be signaling growth. So it's a very different way of being, and when we step into the pause, there is extraordinary power in that. And I believe that power is what allows us to galvanize the courage, the whisper, not just for ourselves, but for our community and for our culture and for our countries and for our world that needs more of this right now.
I couldn't agree with you more, Susan. Everyone who's been listening or watching today, if you want to dive deeper, you can grab a copy of Susan's book, Emotional Agility, Get Unstuck, Embrace Change, and Thrive in Work and Life. It's right there. We'll put a link in the comments as well. Susan, I meant to, as I said a few moments ago, I've learned so much today. And we end every On Purpose podcast episode with our final 5 segments. So these questions have to be answered in 1 word or 1 sentence maximum. So we'll see how it goes. First question is, what is the hardest part about being courageous?
The hardest part is, in a world that seems to draw us in other directions and compare ourselves constantly, it's about being grounded in what your version of success and effectiveness looks like.
What is the skill that you missed out on before you learned to be emotionally agile?
Well, firstly, I think I'm still learning to be emotionally agile. I think for me, I have very big emotions. And so I think for me, it was like often getting hooked into these difficult emotions where, you know, the arguments that I would have with my husband are like, you know, you don't love me. And I know, you know, the drama queen. And I think that for me, it was being able to almost recognize. The capacity to helicopter above our emotions and to be able to be wise in the place of our emotions.
All right, question number 3. What's something that you know to be true, but others may disagree on?
Happiness is overrated as a goal. We get to happiness by pursuing things that are meaningful rather than by pursuing happiness in itself.
Question number 4. What is one thing you wish you knew 10 years ago?
One thing I wish I knew 10 years ago is how quickly it all goes. You know, how quickly children grow up, how quickly 10 years flies, how quickly it goes. I turned 50 this year and it just goes.
Happy birthday in advance and congrats. It's amazing. And fifth and final question, what's the biggest lesson you've learned in the last 12 months?
The biggest lesson that I've learned in the past 12 months is that often the things that you feel are going to be really difficult, and I'm talking in this context for me, I went from, traveling constantly into being at home, are often an invitation to practice your own work and to reset. And I think for me, very much, at first there was this idea of, oh my goodness, all of the things that are typical in my life feel stripped away. And I think that I have learned how resilient we are as human beings if we can step into that. And for me, certainly, I've rethreaded a sense of the way that I'm with my family, the way that I use my time. And it's just actually been, notwithstanding the difficulties, it's been an extraordinary gift for me.
That's a great answer, Susan. I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. Please let us know, where are the best places that people can find you in your work if they'd love to learn more?
Excellent. Well, thank you for listening and thank you for inviting me here, Jay. So a couple of things. Firstly, Jay has mentioned my book, Emotional Agility. Secondly, my TED Talk, The Gift and Power of Emotional Courage. And then last, if you're looking for, again, something that feels very practical, I've got a quiz that around 150,000 people have taken. You can find it at susandavid.com/learn. And it's a quiz that takes around 5 minutes, but generates a 10-page free report. And it's on emotional agility and connects with a lot of these ideas.
Amazing, Susan. I hope that we get to meet in person when this is all over. I really look forward to it. And this was so much fun. As I said, I've taken away so much from this, and it's truly going to make me approach a lot of situations in my life very differently. So thank you so much for sharing that insight with me. And